morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode, I think we're like at 189 or something thereabouts of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. My name is Billy Bob. I am on the West Coast. I have my regular co-host, Ian Kummer, streaming live from a suburb in Moscow, who is now vacationing in his summer home in Crimea. Must be nice, except for the drones, of course, that he hears occasionally. I got one of our special guests, Leo Zhao from East Berlin. He is streaming live. I think it's got to be around 6 p.m. East Berlin time. We also have Dust James. He is coming in and out. He's got some internet problems. He is driving his truck. I'm pretty sure it's North Carolina, and he's heading home, but he's got some spotty internet connection, so he might come in and out. But we're going to start today by discussing the Tucker Carlson, Mike Huckabee interview that a lot of people are talking about. It happened over 3 hours a day or two ago, and just kind of really interesting. We're just in really interesting times, and we have this huge buildup in Iran. And, you have within the ruling establishment, you have opponents, wanting to go to war, and then proponents not wanting to go to war with Iran. And Mike Huckabee is definitely one of those people that wants as much war against Iran as possible, as soon as possible. Then we got Tucker Carlson, who is a little bit opposed to war with Iran. At least, he gives lip service to that. And I also heard on Telegram this morning that Tucker Carlson talked to Donald Trump and tried to dissuade him against attacking Iran. And Telegram says that Tucker's efforts were not successful. And of course, we're going to find out soon whether or not Trump decides to start a large war with Iran. But this Mike Huckabee interview was very interesting. Mike Huckabee, of course, is the United States ambassador to Israel. And he really is an Israel kind of first guy. And he thinks that, the best way we can help America is to help Israel, and that God, of course, will bless our country, as long as we continue to support Israel. And so his perspective comes from that, that perspective of Christian Zionism. And so he kind of got into it with Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson was grilling him on his, Christian Zionist beliefs and on his biblical basis for, wanting to support Israel. And then Huckabee basically said, God gave Israel nearly the entire Middle East, and they could just have it all. So is that really a rational, is that really something the American people ought to be endorsing? Ian, I want to start with you, Ian, because I know you've got some opinions on that.
Well, so I watched I didn't watch the full disclaimer. I didn't watch the entire. It's a 3 hour, like I said, it's a 3 hour interview. I watched most of it, and I watched the highlights that Tucker Carlson himself shared. I listened to the bulk of the interview before I just ran out of time today. But I tried to watch most of it. So it starts with about a 30-minute, which is unusual actually for Tucker Carlson's interview. He actually starts with a 30-minute introduction of just him talking. It's interesting because it was a very strange chain of events. Like, he got invited to talk to Huckabee, and then he was expecting support from the U.S. Embassy to fly him out and meet with the ambassador, which he was expecting. And they said, no, we're not going to support you. So he's like, okay, whatever. He dips into his own pocket to get a chartered flight, and then he asked the embassy, give the Israeli military our tail number and our flight information so we don't get shot down flying over Israel. And they said no. They literally said no. And he's like, well, what? And so he had this huge argument with the embassy staff. They were refusing to give him those comforting thoughts that I'm not going to get shot. Israel isn't going to shoot me down as I'm flying into their airspace. The embassy was just completely refusing, and he ended up screenshotting the conversation, sending it to his connections, in the U.S. government. It's like, well, what's going on with this? And eventually, I guess they got bullied into doing that. And it's and there is a pattern, especially with Israel. They really everybody I know who's been to Israel says they do these intimidation tactics. They make you feel small. They appear big. They physically intimidate you. They psychologically intimidate you. They're not necessarily so. The implication here isn't necessarily that Israel was planning to assassinate Tucker Carlson, though that might have been the case. It's ambiguous, but it's intimidation. They make you feel unsafe. They make you feel alone and unsupported. And the amazing part is that the U.S. government, the State's Department staff that enable this, to actually help them do this against American citizens. And if you can go look online, you can see a pattern of people Americans who've gone to Israel to work. And various, we're not even talking like Greta Thunberg, protesters. We're talking like people on an official capacity, supporting Israel, helping Israel in some way, going there and just being treated like dog shit, basically. There's a long pattern of them doing that. And then he goes on to the interview itself, which is very similar to how Ted Cruz's interview went, where Ted Cruz pretty directly said he serves Israel, not the USA. He entered politics to help Israel. Is literally what he's saying. Like, but I'd say Huckabee is actually more extreme because Ted Cruz, he's a senator. I would hope a U.S. senator is working for the U.S. for the American people. But with Huckabee, I'd say it's even more egregious because he's an actual representative of the U.S. government, of the American nation. He's supposed to be advocating for both for our government's policy and just citizens in general. He's supposed to be the advocate of ours. And he's doing the opposite. It is a hostile. It's very much a hostile interview of Huckabee representing Israel, pushing back against Tucker Carlson. And there was actually a diplomatic scandal, if you look at the news. At one point, Huckabee actually says, because Tucker references their Seven Front War, which basically no one else in the world, it's almost unprecedented. Israel is at war with all of their neighbors, basically. The Seven Front War. And Huckabee directly says Israel has the right to take over the Middle East. He directly says that, and this actually forced Washington to watch their statements. That's because it caused a scandal.
Well, if you're a Christian Zionist, God promised all that land to the Jews, Jewish people, and so it's inevitable that a good Christian, if you believe all that, would support Israel's right.
The issue is that we're actually allies with a lot of these. The U.S. ambassador said Israel has the right to conquer and genocide our allies, and so that caused a problem. So Washington actually had to make an official statement saying he was taken out of context, which is like, it's a video. It's a video of him being asked a question. He responds to what was out of context here. But yeah, so that's. I mean, I have more to say on it, but I think I want to hear what other people, what our guests have to say, and maybe I can agree or push back.
And then before we let Dust get in, I did want to make a disclaimer that Dust is nice enough to come on our show, but it is not an endorsement of any groups that we might or may not be affiliated with. I know we could just leave it at that. But no, Dust, I really appreciate you coming on, and definitely, we have disagreements on certain issues, and your presence here does not indicate your support for every group that we're affiliated with. But any thoughts, Dust, or I'm sure Leo, you've got some thoughts.
Dust might be in a zone where he can't hear us, as possible, because he said he was going to cut in and out because he's working right now.
His microphone is muted.
Yeah, so that indicates he's busy. Leo, why don't you take the floor for us?
Just all this biblical stuff. I mean, it's just layers and layers of obfuscation and excuses and ulterior narratives, distractionary narratives, and just like, that's not. It's like framing. It's like this whole other conversation that everybody's having, which has nothing to do with what is actually going on. What is actually going on is the most important geostrategic location on Earth that's in between Asia and Europe, which needs to be controlled by empire. That is actually what's going on. That has been true since the creation of Israel as the beachfront of Western civilization in a land of barbarians. That's an exact quote from Herzl. What's his first name again?
Theodore.
Theodore. Herzl, the father of modern political Zionism back in 1910 or 19 something like that, early 20th century. I mean, his exact quote was about the creation of Israel for the British Empire, for a projection of colonial power in this area that is all important, not only resource rich, but geopolitically all important because it is it is the heart of the world in a way. I mean, that's where civilization began. You know, the Fertile Crescent in this area, but it connects all these land masses. And according to one of the main architects of the Cold War, in his book The Grand Chessboard, the utmost important objective of U.S. foreign policy is to prevent Eurasian integration. That's the most important thing, and the U.S. has already fucked up majorly by allowing or inspiring even Russia and China alliance. And so now they are desperate to prevent any further kind of integration, economic integration between Europe and Asia. It will be over for empire if that happens. And of course, desperate to disrupt any BRI expansion, which has already massively expanded all over the globe, mainly in the global south. But it was already accepted by, or it was already joined by Italy some years ago before Meloni came in. So like this is a desperately, this is like a desperate project for empire to prevent West Asian unity, to prevent any kind of sovereignty to rise up in West Asia itself, to keep it in chaos, and using Israel, and to prevent the integration of Europe and Asia, and to disrupt BRI, or so the longer term, bigger goals, all of which using Israel, right? And whose uses doesn't end there, of course, not only in the region. Israel's footprint is all over the world. I mean, what's happening in Mexico has everything to do with Israel because Almentro's private military was literally trained trained in Ukraine and armed by Israel. There's a Mexican journalism very clearly reports that Almentro's militia, the narco military, was literally trained in Ukraine and heavily armed by Israel. That was a great shot where Ian was frozen for a minute. That was a nice but yeah, so Israel's footprint was all over the world. I mean, the most fervent supporter of apartheid South Africa, right? Anyway, I can go on, but it has nothing to do with all this Bible stuff. It's just like it's just pure obfuscation and inflames passions because people are so into their like religion, into their church, and it's just oh my god. Anyway.
Dust, what's your take on? Thank you, Leo, for that.
I want to interject real quick. I mean, I want to hear Dust's take too. I want to interject. I do agree. Like, particularly about what you said about the Mexican cartel and Israel, it all being connected. I would say this is one of my big arguments. Thing that gets me into arguments with liberals all the time. These center-left liberals, because they treat world politics as like a fantasy football team where they pick and choose their players. Like, oh, well, I stand with Palestine and I stand with Ukraine, and it's just like that is literally like in World War II saying I stand with Japan and I stand with the Soviet Union and Britain. You can't just pick and choose players from both sides. You do literally have to pick what, because they were blocks. Like World War II, there was one block fighting a second block, and it's the same thing that you have a block of nations and countries that are all connected, right? You can't, so it doesn't make any sense that I stand with Ukraine and stand with Palestine, because Israel and Ukraine are allies. And it's the same thing like with Leo mentioned Mexico. It's well known that in the U.S. military, Mexican cartel members join the U.S. military for the military experience because they want the training and then go back to work. That's in other Latin American gangs also, they join the U.S. That's a well-known problem. That's why they look for tattoos. That's why they're so strict on tattoos and that sort of thing, because they try to screen those guys out. But well, it makes sense. You have an active war. The main modern war happening right now is in Ukraine, so it makes sense for those gangs to say, "Hey, let's send guys there." And Ukraine actively recruits those guys. So it makes sense. So these things are all connected. The main thing I want to stress in that interview, though, I think, like Billy Bob said at the beginning of the stream, there is some conflict going on because Tucker Carlson was, he's a neoliberal baby. He's a nepotism baby. God bless his heart. Not say he's a bad person for that, but he's a nepotism baby. And he's very much grew up in a Cold War family, Russophobic, anti-Soviet, anti-communist, very big on, Pax Americana. America's great because, we're capitalists, we're free market, blah, 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 blah. And we have to stand with Israel. We have to stand against the Soviet, all this crap. So those are the values. Those are the Reagan neoconservative, neoliberal values espoused by Reagan that Tucker Carlson grew up with. And he actually straight up said it in the TED Crew. It was very interesting. He was just like, he looks around and, the promised land, this era of prosperity that was promised to Americans after winning the Cold War did not happen. It's just like everything's worse than it was, at the end of the Cold War. And so to me, you have this, what Leo described, you have this Zionist, globalist faction that's present in different flavors in both Democrats and Republicans driving the train. Then you have these center left and to some extent center right people like Tucker Carlson, like 25 years ago, Tucker Carlson would be center right. Like compare Bill Clinton to Tucker Carlson. What does Tucker Carlson want that's actually materially different than what Bill Clinton was doing in the 90s? 20 years ago, he would have, he'd be center right. He'd be completely average, but they're like, oh, he's far right. He's literally a Nazi. Well, you ask these people, well, why is Tucker Carlson a Nazi? Well, because he doesn't want to have a nuclear war with Russia. He doesn't want to invade China. It says, and you ask. So it's not even I don't say you call Tucker Carlson far right. I don't even say you're an idiot. I just ask you to substantiate the statements. But when you ask these people why, they give crazy responses.
Because he loves
doesn't
dictators.
Want to invade other countries to establish gay marriage there, because we have to, their answers are literally crazy when you ask people. So there is some pushback. You have those MAGA people. You have those maybe the bottom. We call them the bottom half of the capitalists. These factory owners, these people in the Rust Belt who are like, okay, we want protectionism, we want tariffs, we want these kind of militant Monroe Doctrine type people. They think that's what's going to save the U.S. economy, and they pushed for Trump to be in office because Trump said, okay, I'll do that. And they were pushing back against these guys who are post-industrialists. They're like, we don't need industry. We're going to have globalism. We're going to have, Bitcoin. We're going to have, AI and all this other crap. So I think I agree with Billy Bob on that there's a conflict between these two factions who have different visions of what the future is supposed to look like. So sorry, I want to hear Dust.
I think there's a shared objective. I think there's a dispute over the strategy, but let's get Dust in because he might have some pushback. I know Dust is not a fan of Tucker. I think he just represents half of the, not half, but a faction within the ruling establishment that has a different idea about strategy. But go ahead, Dust. We're sorry.
No, that's fine. Thanks for having me on, Billy Bob. I'm off work. I'm in my yard.
Is that
I tried.
snow? Is that snow behind you?
I'm not sure. I think it's just sand or something.
Okay.
No,
Okay, sorry.
there's maybe. No, it's just really bright. The sun is. I'm sitting in the shade, so the camera's in the shade, and behind me is in the sun. So, given the camera's focus, it probably overexposed it. No. Thanks for the disclaimer. Thanks for the introduction. It is interesting that Ian got on right before I come on and said the exact opposite of what I would say. And I think Tucker Carlson is a fascist. And I think he's a fascist. You look at his rhetoric, he is more overtly Western chauvinist than even the neoliberals have been before. He talks about the greatness of England, and he talks about how this white men and white culture have made of what America is. Maybe he's more subtly with it, but he's saying it. He's saying it outright. And he's saying it more outright than any neoliberal, than anyone has before. And the issue that particularly makes Carlson a fascist is openly supporting the repression of undocumented workers. And he has been doing this. Reagan actually gave amnesty to a large section of undocumented workers. Bush was a moderate. The Trump and the Tucker Carlson, the attack China first, like the I think it's MTG and all them. They are more gung-ho at repressing a significant portion of the United States international proletariat than anyone has ever before. And they are fascist. And also, I live in North Carolina, and a lot of these fascist Republicans who have run the South with basically monoparty rule for decades and decades, they are losing their share of votes with the youth growing up and becoming immune to a lot of stuff they're saying. And they're heavily more relying on the trans issue to keep in power and to stay in political office and to continue to take our resources and continue to have us to have the worst labor laws in the state, have the continue to cut our health care, and anti-transphobia is a huge portion of keeping the way they're pivoting. And Tucker Carlson's a part of this. If you add in the overt Western chauvinism, the support for the aggression against undocumented workers, if you put how transphobia is being used to get austerity policies, I mean, Tucker Carlson is a fascist, enemy of the people. From the stance of a worker among the international proletariat within the belly of the beast, he is not only a neoliberal, he is a further aggression against the people, and he is more overt with his violence and his supremacy, and he is a fascist. Like, I'm not like, do I know who Huckabee is? Huckabee is, arguably also a fascist. So it's two fascists sitting down, having a conversation. One of them's like, oh, it's like, I wouldn't even call it, it's like good cop, bad cop, maybe. But I mean, largely Tucker Carlson has been in the attack China instead of supporting Israel or attacking Russia. That seems to be this portion that he's hooked to. I'm not sure about him as an individual. I don't really watch Tucker Carlson. I understand a lot of people are, manipulated by him, but I think he's a fascist. And what was particularly effective about his form of fascism is what gets put into place in policy are, repression of immigrants, further attacks on the trans community, LGBT community, the monoparty rule in the South, further austerity, further cutting all of those aspects of his position are going into effect and continuing and expanding. What doesn't ever happen, what ever gets listened to, is, oh, maybe we should slow down our support of Israel. Maybe we shouldn't attack Iran. These never get said. And when he's used to support all that shit that is happening, and they ignore that, that makes him look like he's against the establishment. It makes it look like he's a resistance to the elites or something, which just makes his brand of fascism more effective.
Can I just a quick,
go ahead, Leo.
note? Do you guys remember this Tumblr called "Gay or Just European"? Like we should do.
I don't read Tumblr. Sorry.
No, it was a long time ago. This is a classic, like early 2000s. But we should do another one called "Fascist" or just regular liberal, conservative liberal. But I think the definitions almost don't even matter all that much. It's like, I mean, we know liberalism is just a good cop of. It's just a polite twin of fascism. I mean, it's the same agenda. It's the same anti-working class agenda. It's liberalism is the ideology of the bourgeoisie. Whether you're conservative liberal or progressive liberal, doesn't fucking matter. Whether you're against trans rights or pro-trans rights, it doesn't matter. You're against the working class. The conservative liberal versus progressive liberal, I mean, it's the flip side of fascism. It's the same thing. Ultimately, it's the same thing. It's for minority rule. It's for bourgeois rule, as opposed to majority rule of the working class. So, like, these, like, we can get lost in the weeds of these definitions forever, but we can also cut through a lot of these debates and get to the heart of the problem, which is capitalism, imperialism.
Well, I want to interject with a question.
I wanted to respond that my specific thing isn't what makes a fascist if they're transphobic. Now, the fascists do lean in the transphobic, but particularly in the South in regards to fascism. In the Black Belt South, we have higher poverty rates, we got higher incarceration rates, we have more intense prison system, violence within the prison system. We have more people joining the military, violence within the military, all of these things, and the standard of education is worse. The standard of healthcare is worse. All of these things are worse. So I would say the Republican mono-party rule in the South has been fascist for a long time, particularly the main victim being black workers, but also poor whites, and more recently Latin American immigrants. It's almost like a third in a lot of the public school systems, especially in North Carolina and parts of the South. And they're not the same exact people as Tucker Carlson, or maybe the Bushes, maybe some of these more northeastern type, Republicans, but this is a lot of their base. And with their inability with the changing demographics, they have leaned into these outright fascists who are different from the liberal imperialists.
Like, if we want to, I mean,
they're different from the liberal. Like there's better like if you go outside, even less so in the Midwest, but more in the North, more in California. If you look at places where the Democrats are in control, they do not have as bad conditions or of aggressive state repression.
Sure.
As what is going on in the South. And transphobia is a way of manipulating workers into supporting their own repression and austerity in that regard. And that's what I mean by the distinction why I think Tucker Carlson is a fascist, but I think, the neoliberal imperialists are just the more effective imperialists, but also support fascism.
But I mean, it depends on which set of definitions we want to use for fascism, right? I mean, historically, the more academic or like technical definition of fascism is immediate total control of the media, like a total disallowing any kind of alternative voices to be heard, and total control of the state, like purging like the other half of the state or like anybody who disagrees,
Yes.
even the moderate right wing, right? You literally like uh mass murder, like that's classic fascism, right? So like I don't know if we want to argue about semantics, like if we do, like I don't know if using like fascism in such a broad sense is actually you know helpful or
Well, let me ask this. Let me ask this: was Bill Clinton a fascist?
No. Actually, yeah, in a lot of ways he was. He really did help build. If you look at neoliberalism, what Reagan started, essentially, Bill Clinton was the vast expander of this. And he also was the first person to put walls up along the border. He's the one that initiated the militarized border patrol, like all of it. He wasn't as overt with his race. He tried to do the opposite. He tried to be, oh, I'm the friend of black people. We need to keep communities safe. The crime bill and all this. And he helped enable Bill Clinton's federal policies. Basically, made it easier for the Republican fascists in the South to do what they were doing. Like they're like it's hard to say they're both on the same team, but no, I would not define him unless you. I think depends on your definition of fascism. My definition of fascism, which goes along with the outright, like no democratic rights, not even the semblance of it. I think oppressed people in the United States have been living under that condition for a long time.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call him a fascist by that definition, but I can see where an oppressed person would be like, oh, they're both fascists, because from my end of what I'm receiving, they're both fascists. I can even see poor whites making the argument because they live under similar conditions
Absolutely.
in the South that they're both fascists. That they're both fascists. But I'm drawing the dividing line on the dividing line. They try to, like Bill Clinton and the liberals, they try to make it appear like they're not. And maybe Tucker Carlson does in a way, but in a lot of ways, he's overstretching the lines and going into fascist territory. And if you look at the people that are supporting ICE and what ICE is doing, it's a complete breakdown of democratic processes that hasn't happened before. And also in the South and a lot of other places, we had the Civil Rights Act, and now people like Tucker Carlson are going after even the semblance of it. They're going after the Civil Rights Act, and the only reason why Republicans still control the South is because of gerrymandering and the suppression of the black vote. So when you start saying, oh, I don't even support when you start saying stuff like, I don't support the Civil Rights Act, maybe Martin Luther King wasn't a good guy, the power of everything comes from Western, like this, we're getting into fascism. Like maybe it isn't there yet, we can argue on that, but there is a distinct line that Tucker Carlson is going into and approaching. I think it's wrong to characterize him simply is a neoliberal.
I don't know if there's a lot of utility in just debating, whether an individual, fits some definition of fascism. I mean, it's no problem. Like, I don't have any problem calling him a fascist. I don't have any problem calling him not a fascist. Like, I mean, Hitler was a fascist. Hitler was openly racist. He was a white supremacist. He didn't hide it. Tucker tries to hide it. So, again, anybody can have their own definition of what a fascism is. It doesn't really matter to me. I think we're kind of getting lost in the weeds. I want to point out. Go ahead, Ian.
Getting lost in the weeds. I mean, it's just like no one. I mean, this is my issue with the whole thing. With the I don't trivialize, people's opinions on, culture war issues, but it's just like, it's like this was this weird, and I don't even know what to call it. It's like no one mentioned transgender issues or why it's just like, well, Tucker thinks we shouldn't have a nuclear war with Russia, that we shouldn't let Israel genocide the entire Middle East. It's like, well, he's a fascist because he doesn't support transgender issues. What does transgender issues have to do with anything? Why is it like what?
That's not why he's a fascist. He's not a fascist because he doesn't want to. He's a fascist because he wants to exterminate immigrants, forcefully remove them from our society, and have no rights for anybody that differs from his norm. Like that's why he's a fascist. And the reason why you didn't hear about it before was because the Republicans were firmly in power. And now
it doesn't matter if we call him a fascist or not.
But we definitely, I think we can all agree he is an enemy.
We can call him a fascist. Yeah, sure.
He's an enemy of the people.
Absolutely.
And I would say that he's just as, if not more dangerous than people like Huckabee.
I mean, it's just like,
and the reason why is just he supports domestic suppression and austerity, and they support oppression and austerity abroad. And both of those things that they push get done.
I'm assuming Ian is incredulous or is he credulous? He's one of those things, because we're talking about policies towards Iran. And if Tucker is a voice of reason suggesting we don't attack Iran, or with Russia, if Tucker is a voice of reason saying, hey, why are we antagonizing Russia? Now, again, I would argue that Tucker just, he has the same objectives and goals as Mike Huckabee does, but he wants to pursue a different strategy. But why are we dragging domestic politics if we're trying to talk specifically about the divide in the ruling class over what to do with Iran and what to do with Russia? I mean, can't we support one person, having a large platform and saying war with Iran would be bad, war with Russia would be bad? Is that something we can agree with?
No, we can't. We cannot support the most overt person supporting the criminalization and attacks on our fellow workers just because they have a better foreign policy position. That is absolutely absurd. And I would think what is primary, if we want to build an anti-war movement, we have to organize the working class. You want to organize the working class against the system, you have to organize those who are most willing to fight for it and have the least to lose, meaning undocumented workers. Undocumented workers are a huge portion of the international proletariat in the United States.
Look,
and when people like Tucker Carlson and people like Tucker...
Sorry, bro. The world reality is that it's bifurcated. Everything is so separate, yeah? Foreign policy, geopolitics is very much divorced, separated from domestic policy. Like it's like in every sphere of life, neoliberalism has this effect of bifurcating, of separating like different things, right? Like these they're kind of like they are connected, absolutely, and they affect each other. But like foreign policy and geopolitics and domestic politics are kind of their separate sphere. And, if anyone, no public politician or figure in the US, in Germany, in England that is allowed any platform is good on both sides. No one. Michael Parenti didn't have a platform, right? He was very marginal. Like, no public figure has a perfect policy on both sides. Like, some have good domestic policy, yeah? And some have good foreign policy in the US and in Germany as well. Like, there's very, very few. Okay, let's not say no one, but like very few. And the ones who are good on both tend to be very marginalized, right? So, doesn't it make sense that we can partially support their positions on certain issues domestically or in terms of geopolitics, right? And criticize them
I mean,
on the
yeah,
other side, right?
I'm doing that, but to say that one is more important than the other is where it can't be possible. Like, you cannot build a movement to oppose the imperialist system. Like, these things aren't separated. The
No, they're
oppression
not. They're
of
not
it's the
separate.
same monopoly capitalists wanting to take resources there and keep them poor and oppressed. The same people doing it is here. And the only way to build a movement here is to organize along the contradiction that exists here, and then oppose this government and stand in solidarity with other people being oppressed by the same system. So what I'm saying, we can say, oh, Tucker Carlson is less of a hawk within, he's an imperialist, but he's less of a hawk of an imperialist. I say that. We can say that. But I think it's just as important to say Tucker Carlson is an enemy of the people, and Tucker Carlson is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than the hawk imperialist, because he is a hawk imperialist domestically.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has said that geopolitics is more important than domestic politics. But I mean, if we're going to actually compare those two to the extent that they can be, compared or measured, I would say imperialism is the single most primary contradiction that is afflicting our world, because the absolute fucking horrendous wars in Africa, in Sudan and Congo, right? That has everything to do with the U.S. ability to oppress people in the southern states. That has everything to do with that. Like, it's directly connected, and I would say that it's the direction of influence, or like what's happening in the Congo makes it possible for the imperialist capitalist empire to oppress their own citizens, because they get all this super profits, and they can use these super profits of these minerals and energy or whatever from Africa, from Asia, from South America. That keeps the establishment going, right? That reinforces the power structure at home in the United States, right? So if we're going to actually compare, I would say imperialism is the primary contradiction. And so, anti-war, I would say, is even more important than class struggle at home. I would say it is. And if we look at the Bolshevik Revolution, it was primarily the issue that they campaigned on the most was not class struggle; it was anti-war. That's how they got into power, actually. And I think war is becoming more and more urgent in the Western Hemisphere. Like, it's affecting Europeans, absolutely. We have our leaders in Europe are pushing for a war in 2 years, like literally a war, a major war in 2 years. They've forgotten what it's like in the trenches, millions dead, and and in the U.S. as well. Like, Trump is getting into these disastrous debacles all over the place, and unless you're an accelerationist, which part of me is, so part of me am, part of me is.
So Leo, given all that perspective, I mean, yeah, when I hear Tucker Carlson take on Huckabee and make him look,
I don't.
Wait, sorry, Ian.
I'm
Billy.
sorry, I cut out. Can you hear me?
I was making a statement.
Yes. I just want to psychoanalyze this, because I don't understand. Because on one hand, you have Huckabee, who literally just basically says, Israel, Jews have the right to genocide everybody, because the Bible said the book of Samuel says they have the right to inherit, the whole region. Then you have Tucker, who says, no, that's bad. Murder is bad, genocide is bad. But we've spent the last 40 minutes of this show ranting about how, Tucker is the same as Hitler, and not a single negative word about Huckabee. I don't understand. There's just all this rage against certain right-wing figures who push back on, it's just because, do you see what I mean? There's just all this rage, and it's just not just you guys. There's so much rage. Like people will go on for hours about how they specifically hate Tucker and a couple of these other right-wing guys who push back against U.S. policy. But the guys who just literally just sit there and say genocide is good get no hate at all. Why is that? Why is this so focused hatred on anti-establishment figures? Why?
Can you hear me, Ian?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
No, I was gonna make the same comment. I was gonna take it from a little bit of a different angle, and I was just gonna say, can't we appreciate when Tucker uses his platform to push back against this idea of another genocidal war against Iran, which would be awful for the entire region. So when he's using his large platform to push back against that and exposing Huckabee as the nonsensical, crazy person that he is, like, I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate that distinct from Tucker Carlson being an awful fascist in other respects. So, and I think that's what, that's the kind of the dichotomy that we're seeing with our panel today is like, we're having a hard time understanding why Dust can't appreciate, Tucker using his platform for some,
I honestly don't think he's being an effective anti-war voice whatsoever. I think if you look at his audience and who watches him, it is actually doing a disservice to the anti-war movement. Tucker Carlson is doing a disservice to the anti-war movement, because the only effective anti-war movement we're going to get in this country, and has been and continues to be, from the oppressed and the exploited against the system. If you look back into Vietnam, the largest demonstration against the war in Vietnam was the Chicano moratorium, which was largely influenced by Chicanos in the Southwest. If we look at those who actually went up and fragged their commanding officers, it was black soldiers who were dealing with racism. These issues are interlinked. And if you look at the way Obama was used to put oppressed people to sleep, who were the most militant and active in the anti-war movement, and then now you look at these, I believe, fascist voices who are the most anti-black, the most anti-immigrant, the most anti-Chicano. These are now the faces of the anti-war movement. And I think this really is a psyop against us. And what Tucker Carlson does, he gets the anti-war movement associated with those horrible traits like racism and anti-immigrant and xenophobia. He's associated with that with the anti-war movement, making it where the most effective people who have organized and been the core of the anti-war movement are most turned off by the anti-war movement. So he's not building an effective anti-war movement. And effectively, he is smearing the anti-war movement and allowing the liberals to further attack the anti-war movement by allowing. You said that, well, no one's good on both. They're either good on one or the other. They perfectly set up this dynamic where the only people, you're never going to see someone who's concerned about class, who's concerned about national liberation, and is anti-imperialist. You're never going to allow them to see that. And now this dynamic that they've done hurts the anti-war movement. To make these right-wingers to face the anti-war movement ultimately hurts our ability to build an anti-war movement. I think Tucker Carlson does does more to help the imperialists being anti-war than he would being pro-war.
It's just interesting because you're using the same dialectic as what I see the pro-Ukraine crowd use. Because I see like the Telegraph and these other European outlets that support Ukraine. They say, well, it's bad when Ukraine commits war crimes or commits genocide because it gives the Kremlin, and they literally, by the way, I'm not exaggerating, they literally say this, well, it's bad when Ukraine commits war crimes or commits genocide or, oppresses the Russophone portion of the population because it gives credence to Kremlin talking points. And it's just, because this whole time you've complained, well, it gives credence to right-wing talking points when Tucker correctly bashes, the war movement. Well, instead of complaining that the fascists are correctly saying that that the USA shouldn't murder millions of people, maybe you should spend all that mental energy hating Tucker Carlson for being correct on being anti-war. You should.
No, that's not why I hate him. That's not.
I mean, because liberals are silent. I mean, admit it. Liberals are totally silent. Totally silent on being anti-war.
I'm not a liberal. I'm a communist. I did counter recruitment in high school. I've been active in the anti-war movement.
Let me ask you this. Okay, let me ask you this. So Iraq was estimated to have killed roughly 2 to 3 million people. So directly answer this. Which is more important, avoiding a war with Iran or border policy, immigration to the USA? Which is more important?
Well, when it comes to building resistance among the oppressed and exploited in the United States, stopping literal slave labor and human trafficking and supporting their rights is going to come first, because we're not going to get nowhere if we allow that to happen. We're not going to be able to build a labor movement. Part of the reason why the labor movement was able to be destroyed is because the Communist Party dropped the thesis on the Black Belt. And when they did that, they abandoned the South. And first they got rid of unions. And then they had unions up north, but there was absolutely no union movement here. And that was destroyed the union movement. We need to organize the undocumented workers to have any power. Our power is based off organizing along the contradictions here. We're not going to. Okay, what have been the major mobilizations that people have come out to recently? The fight against ICE, Black Lives Matter. Now they have the liberals have co-opted these movements, but what has got people out fighting against the state? It has been the issues along national oppression, and then on the class issue, Occupy Wall Street. But I mean, we haven't anti-war. Even if you go back to the Vietnam era, when the anti-war movement was the biggest, arguably the fight for civil rights was bigger than the anti-war movement. And it continues to be the main organizer and mobilizer, is the fight against national oppression, which is very much linked with the class question. You can't talk about class without talking about national oppression in the United States. It's impossible to do it. You talk about what's going to mobilize people here, what's going to create an anti-war movement, and the ethnic targeting of people in the streets with no due process in order to keep them in fear and continue to work for less is the most pressing issue that we need to be mobilizing people around.
Don't you think it's incredibly cynical to say that the domestic unionization movement is more important than not genociding millions of people?
No, I mean, look at it. What is going to get people motivated? What is going to can build power to oppose the imperialists? And it's not going to come from an affection for people abroad. It's going to come from the contradictions here. You're not going to build an effective anti-war movement without organizing the working and oppressed here against our oppressors here in solidarity with those people. It's not. That's a liberal. You're supporting a liberal anti-war movement. I'm supporting a class struggle anti-war movement.
I don't care about your class struggle. I care about not cluster.
And that's why liberals like yourself will always be ineffective and never be able to accomplish anything.
What have you accomplished, guys?
I'm a Marxist looking back on history, and I've stated that the largest anti-war protest in Vietnam was the Chicano moratorium, and was a lot of black anti-war. And if we look at recently, Black Lives Matter was the main, and what's going on right now, what's mobilizing, getting young people out in the streets, getting out of school, is the fight against ICE. Now you did have.
It's true. I mean, it's true.
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with you,
okay,
so, like on a fundamental level.
Okay, so you bring up
on a fundamental level,
right.
absolutely. The true,
Nixon said,
the actual
guys are right. I'm
anti-fascism.
Not people anymore. I'm just going to use a volunteer military to rape and murder Vietnamese. The left-wing movement, anti-war movement, collapsed. That's a fact. Anti-war movement collapsed when Nixon said, "Oh, okay, volunteers. It'll be volunteer. You have to volunteer to say I want to rape Vietnamese women and kids," and that was fine. Yeah, the anti.
That was a failure of the New Left. It was largely based, other than the Black Power movement, honestly, and the Chicano movement were actually the front lines of the anti-war movement.
No,
Okay,
on a
Um,
fundamental
I wanted to
level,
hear
I
Leo had a
agree
point.
with Dust here. I mean, the only real anti-war, the only real anti-fascism, is the Soviet Union. Is class-based. Is class-based politics. It is class-based people power that can actually launch a war against fascism and win, and crush the fascists, right? And wars. Like communism is the only thing that will end all wars on this planet, and that's a class politics. That's
yeah,
the
I mean,
class war.
it doesn't really matter if a bunch of middle class, mostly white suburban people are yelling about, oh man, um, those liberals are so bad. Those liberals are more pro-war, and I support Trump. He's not as bad at the war, but he's still bad. But we really need to go after and attack these immigrants who are making our lives worse. Like, having people like that doesn't help the class struggle. It doesn't help build the anti-war movement. It doesn't do any of those things. We need to be out there defending the kids that were getting suspended for leaving class because they see their neighbors and friends being kidnapped in the streets. Like that. And if we can educate them about the larger imperialist system, about how those people getting kidnapped in the streets is directly tied not only to Palestine, but to the Ukraine proxy against Russia, and is, as well as the subjugation of Africa and the wars against China, I think that would be better at building an anti-war movement here, is combining those issues. Like, you can't really divorce them from each other. That's how we build an anti-war movement.
I mean, this is a very interesting discussion. I'm always struggling to understand, because to me, it's like, I mean, I'm happy when people are using their platforms to talk and denounce war, and that seems like an objective good in and of itself that I am happy for. And so, it's it's always interesting to hear Dust, because I don't directly disagree with anything he's saying, but at the same time, I can't quite appreciate where he's coming from fully, because I don't know, it just seems obvious that we appreciate Tucker Carlson for saying that we shouldn't unconditionally support Israel, and we shouldn't go to war with Iran, and we shouldn't have and continue to antagonize Russia. And I know that he doesn't have the same end goal as I do. He probably has the same end goal as Huckabee does, as Trump does, as the Democrats do, as the Republicans do. They have the same objective, but they want to pursue different means. And I think it's good when they have internal conflict among themselves and they have these spats. But it's also bad because people tend to think that that's what politics is. It's taking one side of the imperialists against the other, when in reality, like Dust is saying, we need to organize our own politics, our own party, and and overcome this duopoly where it's just side A and side B of the same imperialist oligarchy. But
well, I was telling Billy Bob before the show started, because I'm in Crimea right now. We went back to our house in Crimea. We brought the dog and the cat, and yesterday we had a drone attack. We could hear it. The Russian missile defenses, shot these drones. These American funded drones that visit us, several times a week, and they shot them down. It makes the dogs bark. The drones, they shoot the missiles. The drones explode. All the dogs bark. They bark at the drones. So, from my perspective, I watch, I go on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, and I see Tucker Carlson say, hey, war is bad. And I hear the other side that's saying that, it's good for Ukrainian fascists, and Cuban class traitors and, these Syrian dissidents to come to America and get welfare. It's great. But, that's more important than stopping, it's just it's hard for me to empathize. It's hard for me to empathize because, on one hand, you're saying that the USA is literally like Nazi Germany, but but telling someone he can't live in the USA is the same as like pushing him into an oven at Auschwitz. I don't understand. I don't understand.
We don't have an immigration system in the United States. We don't have a social justice system in the States. We have processes in place to maintain national oppression. So U.S. imperialism exploits Latin America, keeps them poor with CIA coups, etc. And it's mostly the indigenous populations who are dying along the border, who are the poorest within Latin America based on U.S. influence. So if you add these two things together, repression, imperialist abroad, plus militarized border, mostly indigenous people dying on the border, and then racism within the United States, coupled with the immigration system that keeps a large sections of the population without rights, this is a continuation of genocide. This is not an immigration system. This is a genocide system. This is an exploitation system. I mean, it's obvious. We're not talking about immigration. We're talking about fighting against national oppression of all of Latin America and oppressed people within the United States. That's what we're talking about, and that's why we don't support the prison system, the prison industrial system, the immigration. All of this is tied in, and it's a genocide system. It's an oppression system, and it's all built to turn human bodies and lives into capitalist profits. So we're not talking about immigration. We're talking about opposing genocide.
Well, I think
because that's what Tucker Carlson wants is genocide. That's what Trump wants is genocide. He wants to maintain and continue genocide and exploitation.
So this week, and the topic of our show. So the topic of our show is, analysis of the Carlson-Huckabee interview. What's in the news right now? The biggest news is the buildup for a possible war with Iran that could have catastrophic consequences for the entire planet. So that's really what we were going to talk about today. And it definitely is. Everything is connected. I mean, you don't understand something unless you understand how it connects to everything else. So, I mean, you're absolutely right that, domestic politics is connected with foreign policy, and understanding that connection is important. And I mean, of course, who would oppose, organizing with people? I mean, every person. But obviously, those that have the least to lose are the most organizable. I can acknowledge that truth. But we should also organize, everyone that is, that can be reached, that we can appeal to, that can understand, the Marxist reality and dispense with, their liberal perception, the liberal worldview that we've all been indoctrinated in from cradle to grave. And so I think that we can reach people of all kinds, who are actually interested in understanding reality for how reality actually works, and explain things to them and get them to have the proper activism, to have the proper understanding, and, support the proper, the things that are going to be necessary to improve our society and to manage the decline of Western imperialism. But, and so we don't oppose. I don't think anybody here opposes organizing, the most poor, the most vulnerable. Definitely. Hopefully we don't also oppose organizing other people, educated people, middle-class people. But I think that explaining, so, it's important to understand the two perspectives, right? Where you have a liberal worldview, and then how that liberal worldview kind of obfuscates the alternative reality. The actual reality. It obfuscates the Marxist reality, where class is really the driving factor. And right now, today, we have an empire that is based on the interests of the Western oligarchy, the Western ownership class. They have this global empire that is losing power. And we talked about the desperation. Somebody used desperation earlier today. So there's this desperate effort to really, do something to stop this decline of Western imperialism. And it's starting with Iran, because Iran is like the low-hanging fruit from the perspective of the oligarchs. And, Iran is going to be a stepping stone towards, really being able to contain Russia and contain China. And so they feel that's where they have to strike first. And I say desperation because another thing in the news is, how this aircraft carrier that we're sending over there has been deployed for like 8 months, 9 months. And apparently they don't really have a working toilet system. And so you got like lines of 45 minutes. And there's all these memes about this shit aircraft carrier, on its way to Iran. But it's interesting. I know every time, we talk geopolitics, Des likes to bring it back to domestic politics. And that's totally understandable because there is a relation. But I think I get kind of frustrated because, I think it's good. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's good to advocate for not attacking Iran, not moving our planet into a territory where millions of people are going to get killed. You're going to have a global economic collapse, and I think people ought to raise their voices against that and use their platforms to oppose that, and loud and clear. And I don't go ahead, Leo. I'm rambling.
The central question that we are arguing here is a very important one. To what extent can we support any kind of bourgeois anti-war sentiment? To what extent? I mean, I would say not zero, but I ultimately I would agree with us not much because it's not real. Because number one is not real, Ian. Meloni, got into power on an anti-NATO ticket.
Yeah. So
as
did
soon
Trump.
as she got into power, she became a big supporter of NATO and canceled BRI.
Maloney is correct me if I'm wrong, it's the Italian woman, right?
Yeah. The woman. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, to what extent is it real? I mean, I would say not zero. I would say procedurally, I would say temporarily, because of the class contradiction between different strata of the bourgeoisie. There is some perhaps temporary gains that we real anti-war people can exploit, can use on a temporary basis. But I would say, like, do not be do not entertain any illusions that these people are at all actually anti-war, that are actually against imperialism. Like the German anti-imperialist, AfD, I would say, like, on a temporary basis, maybe they can be useful to stop this bullshit, but they just want Germany to become an imperialist power again, and just like Tucker Carlson, like, ultimately he wants U.S. primacy. Ultimately he wants, white primacy, supremacy. So
I'll say, I mean, when at the beginning of the show, I was envisioning this going to be a discussion about what Huckabee said, because I'll admit, when I listened to this interview, I actually had to pause it several times because I was just too angry to even continue. It's just as an American, as just a normal American, just listening to this guy in my government just talk about how, like, Israeli interests, Jewish interests are more important than me. I'm just a goyim. I am just like this subhuman who only exists to serve Israel. It made me so. It's hard to even describe how angry I was listening to Huckabee.
Well, it has nothing to do with Jewish. It's Zionism.
Well, I mean,
the Zionists are anti-Jewish.
If you read the description of this video, I wrote the description to this video, and I compared it to Ukraine, because unfortunately, as an American expat, as an American citizen who lives overseas, I've had this feeling for years that the U.S. government is subservient to foreign interests, and this is very clear in Ukraine, because there are two links. If you look at the description I put to this video, there are two links. The first one is to a North Dakota farmer. Kurt Groszhans was his name. He went to Ukraine. He went to court because he got embezzled. He bought farmland in Ukraine. He hired a manager to manage his land. He got embezzled. He went to court. They threw him in prison. And the U.S. government, this was under Biden, they did not care. They did not advocate for him. He was just in prison for years. His state representative eventually got him out of prison. Then the second link I put in that description was Gonzalo Lira, who is he was American. He's Latin American also. I did not read the article for a while. I think was it Chilean?
Chilean.
Yes, Chilean. So he was reporting from Ukraine. He got thrown in prison. The SBU tortured him to death. Not a single protest from the U.S. State Department. No one cares. And stories like that it's not so Leo, yes, you're right. It's not just Jews, it's not just Israel. It's this globalist government that somehow does not care about the American nation. They think, fuck, it's like I just feel like giving the middle finger.
Yeah, exactly, precisely, because it is a minority class of people that serve their own interest. It has nothing to do with America. It has nothing to do with England. Like English people are suffering under this, are fooled by the minority ownership class, which is interested in destroying Russia, which is interested in destroying Iran, so that they can have total class domination. And if they have total class domination over the globe geopolitically, then they have total class domination over the domestic working class. And now the present situation today, I would say, is that the class war has been won by the bourgeoisie. Victory. Like a victory. They are enjoying a victory to the extent that they can release 2 million pages of child rape and systemic fucking murder, and nothing will happen. And nothing will happen. These people, their names will not be revealed, even though we have them. That the authorities have their names. So a total victory of the class war. So the only thing standing against these people, and this is kind of why imperialism is the primary contradiction, is the only forces standing against this class of people, these parasites, these fucking vampires, right? Is Russia, is Iran, is China, is North Korea. These are the only forces in this world that are actually standing, that's blocking their way to total fucking Caligula, the most evil fucking total domination and using people as objects.
That's a great point. I mean, I'll let Dust respond.
I want to respond to what Leo said, though. I want to respond to what Leo said, because I agree. I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you, especially what you said about Russia, China, and North Korea and Iran being, the force for good. I do want to say that the main thing is, with these right wing. I mean, I feel the same way when I see left wing people who feel, or liberal people, or just I feel the same. But it tends to be mostly right wing people, because this is the way it happens. When I look at these people, I see, these are guys on the street. These are normal people who have normal feelings, and they're like, they speak, like when I listen to Huckabee, when I listen to Anthony Biden, when I listen to, certain, in both Republicans and the Democrats, these deep state people, I feel they're fake. They're just automatrons. We're just, speaking the line. But when I see certain people, even people I think are very stupid and ignorant, I can see, oh, well, this person actually believes what he's saying. So, Tucker Carlson, he actually believes what he is saying. Like Marjorie Green, I hated her for years, because when she talks about the Soviet, she would go to, onto the floor with her stupid.
Ian, we lost you.
You say these really stupid things about communism or Soviet Union or whatever, and it's like, oh my fucking God, woman. It's like my eyes would roll up into the back of my head. But when she talks of, what I saw her tweet about the Epstein files, and it's just like, the American government is evil to tolerate that. I can, so when these people speak from the heart and they're like, well, they're just saying, it's bad to murder people, it's bad to genocide people, it's bad to rape children. I'm like, well, I can agree with you, even if I think your opinions about the Soviet Union and Russia are stupid. I can agree with you about those things. I think everybody should be able to do that. I mean, it's concerning to me that we're so polarized that we can't say, oh, Marjorie Green is, she's very ignorant about communism. She's very ignorant about Marxism. She's very ignorant about Russia. But when she
No,
talks about,
I think when people say when like bad people say base things, when like cringe people say base things, we should applaud. We should applaud. We should be like, yeah, fuck yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We should stop the fucking war. Now you're still a stupid bitch about all these other things. Maybe we should be like that.
Yeah, Dust. What are your thoughts, sir?
I really liked. It says, I'll go by your name. You put Z. I really liked what he said about the main resistance to imperialism coming from the oppressed world, and I really agree with that. But at the same time, I haven't given up on hope that we can contribute here. And I don't think it's the Tucker Carlsons or the Tucker Carlson fans or the communists who want to appeal to that audience that are going to do it. I think it is, the people who are engaged in class struggle, what we have left of the labor movement, what we have left of oppressed communities, infrastructure, and community in the ways they are resisting. The only reason why
you think
we have
Russia and China, Dust.
No, I'm not saying we're doing more, but it's all we have.
Well,
we are not Russia and we are not China. We are the workers and oppressed. We are the international proletariat in the United States, and we are all we got. We're all we got. And I'm saying is they're going to do it, not the Tucker Carlsons, not Tucker Carlson's audience. It is that core of the labor movement and the oppressed. But it's from there out. It's from there out. The core is the international proletariat in the United States. The main contradictions are national oppression and class oppression, and it's from that nucleus out that we reach people. We're not going to have the Tucker Carlson audience is not going to carry out a socialist revolution. They're not going to have an effective anti-war movement. It's not going to happen. Can we say, hey, can we approach a worker who may be manipulated by them from that core and say, hey, you know what Tucker Carlson said about that? You like him? That's right. But what he said about your coworker isn't. I mean, that's it. But the core of the labor movement, civil rights movement, the community resistance to our own oppression here is what's going to build the anti-war movement, and we can reach out, but that's got to be the nucleus.
So, which resistance member in your resistance has met with Putin and the Ayatollah of Iran?
Well, I mean, you go back to the Panthers that met with Korea and China. If we go back to one of my favorite is Robert F. Williams, who's a North Carolinian, was actually exiled to Cuba and then later lived in China. There has been people who've done that. And right now you got Black Alliance for Peace. Black Alliance for Peace is meeting with people. Dan Kovalik.
Meeting with Putin is objectively good. I think we can applaud Tucker Carlson for his interview with Putin. I think
I don't know. Ian says that these people sound like even if they do believe what they're saying or they don't believe what they're saying, I think Tucker Carlson's still leaning towards anti-war ultimately hurts the anti-war movement. More than helps it. And I think they purposely put up people who are good domestically and bad abroad in the public light against people who this new dynamic against people who are horrible domestically and better. No, but they purposely put up that dynamic. They purposely put up that dynamic to hurt both our struggles simultaneously. So liberals who are maybe more hawkish on Ukraine. Listen, liberals who are more hawkish on Ukraine, but say they're in favor of civil rights here, ultimately hurt the civil rights movement. You see what I'm saying? So Tucker Carlson ultimately hurts the anti-war movement. So when what they're doing, I'm looking at not as, do I agree what he says? Of course, I agree what he says. But what is he doing actually helping the anti-war movement? And I would say overall, Tucker Carlson is hurting the anti-war movement.
I think if we have a nuclear war with Russia, we're going to have bigger problems than if a person...
But is Tucker Carlson going to stop a nuclear war with Russia? Did the president listen to him about not attacking Iran? Do they listen to the libertarians about anti-war issues? The libertarians are another good example.
I think a lot of people listen to Tucker Carlson, yes. I think a lot of people take...
Yeah, but does he have any political power? Is he building organizations that are going to, here domestically, that can build the power necessary, like the Chinese are doing, like the Iranians are doing, to actually fight against the imperialists? And the answer is no. They will never listen to him. He will always say those two things that he likes. He'll manipulate and trot it out in a way that benefits them.
Well,
always.
There's not going to be anyone that is good on everything that's going to be platformed. Like if you're good on everything and you're preaching truth, you're not going to be platformed. But I like Bernie Sanders when he says, let's get rid of our oligarchy. He calls the oligarchy an oligarchy, and he says, let's get rid of it. He says, let's get a party that represents the working class. And then I like Tucker Carlson when he says, hey, let's be on good terms with the
That's another good example. I think Bernie Sanders is a sheepdog. Yeah. I mean, Bernie Sanders makes wanting healthcare bad when he's so when he's sitting here saying, "Hey, we need to arm the Ukrainians to the nth degree."
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? That hurts our cause for healthcare. Yeah. Like I think they're all tools. The people that get up, we need our own party. We need our own talking heads. We need our own resistance. Yeah, I mean, we need to build something here, and
we need to appeal to people's understanding. We need to get people aware of the reality of the situation. And I think liberalism is the religion that everybody has been indoctrinated into embracing. And we need to explain to people how liberalism is a facade to hide a Marxist reality, right? And so I think we can appeal to anyone across class lines that is interested in knowing truth and understanding why things are the way they are. And I think what I wanted to say to Ian, earlier was that, when you get really angry that, Mike Huckabee isn't representing our nation, it's what you're showing is that you have bought into this liberal idea that doesn't really exist. Because the reality is, right?
Yeah, so we don't have a nation. We don't have a country.
Yeah,
this is the U.S. This is imperialist military base.
Nation states
loyalty
are an idealistic construct. It's idealism, and it's a liberal idealism that really doesn't exist. Because what really exists is a global Western oligarchy that has a global empire, and so from their perspective, Israel is every bit as much of their empire as the United States is. They don't have allegiance to a nation state. They have allegiance to themselves and their global power. So from that perspective, it's just dumb to be a liberal and to think in terms of nation states and to be mad at Mike Huckabee for caring more about Israel. He cares more about the oligarch class and their global empire than he does about the country of the United States or the people that live in it. And as a communist, I don't care more about people in the United States than I care about people in Iran. Like, I'm a human and I care about all humans, and we need to overthrow, this oligarch imperialism that is driving our whole planet to probably an economic collapse and maybe a nuclear war. So, I mean, these are the stakes. And I think things like the Epstein files and things like this total deference to a foreign policy that has it doesn't make sense. If you're a liberal and you think in terms of nationalism, our foreign policy makes no sense. And so you get confused. You're like, what the fuck is going on? And
why call it our?
Huh?
Why call it our?
Why?
Why call it our?
Why
Oh.
not?
You mean our country?
Because the government isn't ours. We
No,
as the international proletariat in America do not
I agree with
control
you.
the U.S. government
I'm
or their
speaking
foreign
from
policy.
the perspective of a liberal.
Yeah.
From the perspective of an indoctrinated.
So, Billy Bob.
It's our government, and they think, why is our government behaving like this? And I want to come in and I want to explain things to them. I want to explain things that it's not our government, that they don't care about nation states, that their loyalty to their class supersedes any rational idea of a national interest. They don't care about a national interest. What we think of as a national interest has nothing in common with what they perceive. So they try and get us to believe that the national interest is really the same as their imperialist oligarch interest. And so that's what their media tries to do. And it's of course, it's false. It's not true. But I think we can appeal and we can help explain things, especially as current events cause this fracture with liberal ideology, right? There's this fracture going on, and liberals everywhere are looking around saying, what the hell is going on? And we can explain them to them. Well, what's going on is your liberal, indoctrinated, religious bullshit has absolutely nothing to do with how things are in reality. And then we can explain to them the reality. And I think we can appeal to middle-class people, to educated people, and also to disenfranchised people, to immigrants. And so, I appreciate that those that have nothing to lose are more likely to, be willing to engage in struggle. That's definitely true. But I think what needs to happen before we ask people to engage in struggle is we have to wake them up to reality. They have to understand how the liberal nonsense that they've been indoctrinated their whole lives with isn't reality based, and that there's really something else going on. And once they have that understanding, then they can make a decision whether or not they're going to sacrifice their struggle. But most people don't even have that understanding. And so that's why we're way far off. And that's why Russia, China, and Iran are the greatest forces against Western imperialism. And I'm sorry, but the domestic politics are way down they're a second. They're not primary, they're secondary, and they're secondary way down the line, just because of the extreme indoctrination that our society has endured for generations. And so it's a lot to overcome. But that's my rant.
Now, Billy Bob, I do have to push back against you a little bit, because actually 5 years ago, I would have agreed with you that America does not have a nation. Right?
Okay.
I felt 5 years ago, I felt very, what's even the word, derooted. I just felt very atomized. 5 years, I would have agreed with you that there is no American nation. But when I came to Russia, it's actually interesting. When I came to Russia, it's like Russians convinced me that there is such a thing as an American nation, because they asked me about, Jack London, they asked me about Steinbeck, they asked me about Mark Twain. Hollywood, they asked me about, they convinced me that there is such a thing as an American nation and American culture. I mean, it's true, we were colonists who came here, we stole land, we conquered land. We weren't a nation, but I think after 200, 300 years, it's fair to call us a nation. We have our own culture. We have our own contribution to humanity.
No, I mean, can you understand my only point is that the government, the ruling class of this country, subordinates the national interest to their imperialist oligarch global interests. And so from their perspective, they don't give a fuck about this country or the people that live in it. They only care about themselves. And they're there's transnational. It's a transnational oligarchy. It's the same oligarchs in Germany and in Europe that have this global empire. So so they don't care about.
I don't know.
I just want to say this to both the panel and the audience. It's like, if we convinced every voting bloc, every nation, to just be more nationalist, just don't worry about global, don't worry about anyone else, just worry about yourself, worry about your own nation, don't give a shit about anyone else, just focus on your own nation. That way, just focus at what Tucker Carlson says. Like, what if Americans just say, we're gonna focus on Americans,
that's
a
fantasy. That's a fantasy that's not plausible because of the way capitalism. That's like saying, like, what if it just rained continuously for 10 years? then we wouldn't have droughts. Like, no, like that's not how it works. You know, imperialism is necessary. There's a reason why as soon as capitalism was installed, right, in the 1600s, as soon as the new bourgeoisie was created, what Shakespeare wrote about, these new bourgeois powers, right? As soon as they came into power, they needed to expand their market. And they set upon to conquer the new world in search of new markets. As soon as capitalism, it's an accumulation. It's a system of private accumulation that demands, that needs, that makes very necessary imperialism.
Capitalism has to constantly grow, no doubt.
I want to respond directly to Billy Bob. He says it's a transnational capital that's dominating the United States. We're also a transnational, international working class in the United States itself. I mean, the Black Belt is an oppressed nation with satellite communities that are segregated. All of the Southwest was stolen, and it continues to be the heart of an indigenous people who are cut down through documented status and other means. The prison. We're a transnational culture, people's entity, and my loyalty as a communist isn't to America, it is to the international proletariat in America. And my vision for a liberated future without class and national oppression would be a transnational unity like the Soviet Union was. When people say, well, we got to have American nationalism is deeply rooted in white supremacy. You're not going to separate those things. It's deeply rooted in national chauvinism. All those authors
would be a step forward, right? American nationalism would be a step forward from what we have now.
I don't know. I don't know first of all, Z said it couldn't exist. Z said it was a lie, which it is. That American national could never exist. It will always be international, and we will also be international. And the only true nations that exist are nations who are oppressed nations, essentially. Once you reach national liberation, and then you become within the capitalist frame an imperialist nation, you almost cease to be a nation as an entity. So I mean,
I'm not sure who you're arguing with or what your point is, honestly. I know what I said, but I'm not sure how your response engages with anything I said. But if you want to...
Well, I was responding to Ian. I thought what you said, I was going off your point that the capitalist international, transnational, so are we. The reality is so are we, and there is no stopping that. So what Ian is saying, as he stated, is a complete liberal farce, and it's a manipulation to get us to continue to support the capitalists. That's all it is. That's all it will ever be.
Liberal idealism to just, hey, here's what we need to advocate for is just every country pursue their own national self-interest. I mean, that's just liberal idealism. That's just like, hey, I just really wish this liberal indoctrination that is not true, I just wish it was true. I mean, that's essentially all that is, and it's just idealism. It's not based in any kind of material reality.
But I was going simultaneously, it is true for the oppressed because the position of oppression has created a specific national condition in the oppressed nations to an extent. So it's interesting. Their national movements in the oppressed world have the ability to fight imperialism. But the national movement here doesn't. It simply does. You cannot. Those are two different material realities. One is fighting against the imperialist, and one of them is a manipulation to support imperialism. And what actually exists here isn't that, especially in the United States. Maybe in Europe you could have like where they're more grounded. They could be like, okay, we're breaking with the imperialist bloc as China rises up, and we're going to be,
No, it's not that simple. Europe wants to be their own imperialist bloc. They want to be. They want to revive.
This is also wishful
Classic.
thinkful. This is also very wishful hypothetical.
Yeah. But maybe, I mean, who knows when they completely crash and burn. But like, too bad Ian is gone. I wanted to say something. I mean, the only way that we can achieve, each nation for its own self-interest, which actually means the interest of others as well, because it's reciprocal. It is reciprocal. It is can only be reciprocal, because if you want the best for yourself, you have to want the best for your neighbor also, because you cannot have the best for yourself when your neighbor is fucking broken and like dying. Like, you cannot have your own house be peaceful and enjoyable. But anyway, that's even beside the point. So the only right. Anyway, the only way we can get to self interest actually is collective interest. And with the defeat of imperialism.
I would reject any idea that, hey, what we need to advocate for is every nation just become nationalistic and I agree. So the solution, what we advocate for, is international, definitely, and it's socialism taking root in every country on the planet, and having, like, we have a capitalist system today that kind of dominates the planet, having a socialist system that dominates the planet. And if we had a socialist system, yes, we would genuinely have consideration and care for neighbors, and we would be developing our neighbors instead of exploiting them. And that's really the future that any rational person ought to fucking embrace. Like, it's so fucking obvious. But it's always very entertaining and intriguing to talk with four astute, diverse intellects like you guys. Who really has something else they would like to say? Because I'm prepared to continue for a few more minutes.
Yeah, so it's good time for closing thoughts. I'll say that.
Yeah, just to repeat for Ian a little bit in a different way. The only thing that's blocking actually the natural self-interest of nations and of individuals is imperialism. Like, I would turn that around, because liberals always say selfishness is bad, self-interest is bad, right? I would say no, self-interest is not bad, but the only thing that's actually preventing us from taking care of ourselves as individuals or even nations is imperialism. It is capitalism. It is private ownership of for-profit property, which enables and ensures these giant monopolies and concentration of power and wealth into the hands of very, very few people. This is a system that prevents the natural self-interest of human beings, the natural self-interest of human beings, which is served by the interest of others as well. Because you cannot be happy when those around you are miserable. It's impossible. If you live in a house with 10 people, you cannot be happy alone. Like, if you steal from the other people and they all hate you, you're not going to be happy. And the same for a nation. This is what Chinese statecraft, Confucianism, has sort of almost figured out over 2,000 years, is that the best way to be the biggest, like, most powerful nation, it actually means being the most generous. It actually means the return gift to the tributaries must be greater than the tribute itself. That's how you prove that you are a greater nation, is by being more generous and by making sure that you help the other nations maintain peace. And by taking care of your neighbors and making sure your neighbors are healthy, making sure your neighbors are prosperous, then you yourself will also be peaceful and prosperous. And we can all be peaceful and prosperous. So, like, self-interest is collective interest. Self-interest doesn't exist alone. It's always mutual and reciprocal.
An informed and rational self-interest.
Yeah. So the only thing that's keeping us from our natural self-interest, which is a good thing, in the Marxist sense, in the dialectical sense, is imperialism, is capitalism, is private ownership of for-profit property, ultimately.
Dust.
Huh? Oh, we haven't heard from Ian. I really like what Z is saying. I think, yeah, I think Ian may have some liberal illusions in U.S. nationalism, as well as nationalism in general. But I like that he has stepped out, and he's I would say he's more informed on a number of issues than the average liberal or conservative, which to me are both liberals. As a communist, I wanted to touch briefly on Mexico and the situation with the cartels there, and mostly they're armed by U.S. weapons manufacturers. The money is laundered by U.S. banks, and it serves the role of keeping Mexico poor. So U.S. banks and corporations continue to exploit Mexico. They are a agent of U.S. imperialism. That is what the cartels and people like Tucker Carlson like to use the cartels to demonize Mexican culture and the Mexican people. The Mexican people and the Mexican culture, which is a deep, rich culture, has nothing to do with the violence that has been imposed by U.S. imperialism. Just like the violence in oppressed communities here has nothing to do with the culture and the people here. I just wanted to say that briefly because that's also in the headlines.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm wondering what the leader of that cartel did. Like, I mean, what did he do to deserve, execution? I mean, of course, the CIA is inextricably linked with all of those cartel organizations, and they use them for their purposes. But it's like ISIS, when they also will attack them when it benefits the imperialists to do that. And so it's just weird what's going on. And it's like, who do you side with? Because you heard that the U.S. was supporting the Mexican government in their attack against the cartel, but then obviously the cartel is destabilizing the region and putting pressure on the government, which is also good for the United States. So
the other thing I'd like to add to that is we have had a social advancement in Mexico with the Morena party, and the previous parties actively worked with the cartels. So the progressive party that has lifted millions of people out of poverty, has built trains, have helped with microloans and infrastructure that the United States would like to overturn because of the violence from the cartels they created, to go back to a government that was exposed, like the Epstein files was exposed with working with the cartels. And the former Mexican governments, which were documented working with them, did things like, I think it was, I might be wrong, I think it was 43 students at a school that was openly communist were murdered and disappeared. And they were linked, and this is the regimes before. So I am hooked in with I still have a lot of connections with the immigrant community here from Mexico, and a lot of Mexican reactionaries. I know a lot of Catholics, and sometimes the Catholic Church will be positive. Sometimes there's a lot of Catholic reactionaries, including Mexican Catholic reactionaries, and they hate the new president. They hate and they're like, well, the reason why they're bad is because they're too soft on the cartels. When the governments that they supported have open documentation of openly working with the cartels.
Interesting.
A lot of changes rapidly taking place. I mean, we could see a war with Iran within hours. I mean, honestly, and that would just forever change the geopolitical, normal that we've had for my entire life.
It looks like, and let's hope that it's the U.S.'s Hormuz moment, like the Suez moment for the British Empire.
Do you guys want to weigh in and say if you think there will be an attack and when, or it's hard to say. It's hard to say. You watch alternative social media, and everybody takes every side, and it's hard to know because it would be so catastrophic but the pressure just seems so great that he's going to have to do it. And so it's like, what is going to happen?
75-25.
75 attack or 75 not attack?
75 attack, 25 taco.
Dust, any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I would. Z said something about. I don't know if it was made as a joke about accelerationism, and I think China is taking the right strategy in being not an accelerationist, and the fact that when conflict outbreaks, unless we are prepared and have the infrastructure to stop them from doing the most harm and then rebuild afterwards, things will be worse. So the focus is not making it worse. The focus is building that necessary infrastructure, both in the oppressed nations and here in the United States amongst, what I've been saying, the labor movement, civil rights organizations, and stuff like I did, like building coalitions between labor and community, building resistance to ICE terrorism, fighting against police brutality. These are the issues that have really come out and radicalized people and got people actively engaged, not in just rhetoric, not in just changing their minds, but physically stopping the state from repressing us and, building the labor movement that the only reason why we have it as good as we still do is because there is still somewhat of a labor movement, particularly the post office labor union, which is in every every small town has at least one good job because of that infrastructure, and we're seeing that expand. We're seeing stuff with a teacher. I'd like to see more of a connection between those two. But, all we can do is put our effort in the build instead of try to push the conflict, just build up our forces and energy. So when the time comes, we're ready.
And I think, we can learn from history. And somebody mentioned earlier how the Bolsheviks did rally around an anti-war sentiment because they knew that war was bullshit. They knew it wasn't in their interest. And I think that could have a very great effect for a working class movement here in the United States. If there is a war that, collapses the global economy, I think that'll be a huge opportunity to organize and for, the working class. And, but I mean, again, do we want to root for that to happen? No, because that would mean a lot of suffering, all around the world. But we don't decide that. I mean, that's going to be something the imperialists themselves are going to decide. And they right now, some are for and some are against within the imperialist camp. And so we're going to watch and see what they end up deciding to do. Did I just get the last word?
Yes, you have the last word. Dinner is ready. I have to.
Okay.
Turn off.
So thank you guys very much. I really do appreciate it. And we will reconvene, I think on Friday. I'll see you guys Friday. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.
Big up.